Again, my name is Sam Holdaway. I am the Health and Wellbeing Consultant for Westfield Health, and my region is the West Midlands region. And we are joined with Richard Holmes. He is our Director of Health and Wellbeing. Can you all hear me okay? Brilliant. So you should have all received the Divided Together report. If you haven't, do let me know and I can get a copy sent over to you. So let's dive in. Richard, can you tell us a bit more about the Divided Together report and the research that's been done?
Yes, Sam, but first, hi everyone and welcome to this, and I hope you find it useful. We're going to skirt over some of the key issues that from the report that you've all been sent. Yeah, let's get on. I mean, you asked there, Sam, what it's about. Well, for the Divided Together report, everyone, we talked to a representative sample of people across the country about how they're feeling, and particularly about work. Now, that included 1,500 employees and also 250 HR managers. And in fact, we've got just coming out another report linked to Divided Together, which is basically covers the responses of HR professionals that we talked to. So that will be being issued out to you all in a short time. Now, as a wellbeing company, we know that there's not this neat line between home and work, Sam. You know, people bring their challenges from one world into the other. We all know that. And I think as employers on this call, we recognise sometimes the issues where employees might blame work for issues to do with their own personal life balance. But as employers, we also see employees bringing their emotional baggage into work from home. So we've got to look at that as a two-way street. And with returning to the workplace, or for those that are on furlough returning to work, you know, distinctly on the horizon now, we wanted to measure the impact of coronavirus in terms of the impact it's had on people and what new challenges that might be creating for businesses need to face. So that's roughly what the report's about. So.
And can you tell us about what the research showed?
Well, I think the big thing, and I want to just put a note of caution for everyone here, it did show that as a nation, we really are quite divided. But the note of caution is, like with all these reports, the media snippets that get pulled out from that are all sort of high profile negative stuff. So I do want to bring up that actually there's an awful lot of positive that's happened over the last few months for people and organisations, and we'll bring those up. But I think we're looking at some of the key visions now, whether that's furloughed versus non-furloughed employees, key workers in the workplace versus home workers, childcare, those not having to. It revealed some serious rifts about how different groups of employees viewed each other. And as we slowly begin to return back to the workplace or back to work, then it could be that the workplace will be a front line for those tensions to reveal and show themselves. And it also showed, the other big thing was that 50% of people in the survey declared that they feel their mental health has deteriorated over the last 3 months. Now, we have to recognise with that as well, that means that half of us have got on with it perfectly all right. And there's not been any impact. But actually for some UK-wide event to then have an impact on 50% of us in terms of our mental health, that is quite, from a wellbeing director's point of view, that's a really serious concern that we need to be aware of and look at how we take steps. So in terms of taking steps, I think the other thing that the research showed significantly was that people are actually now looking to their employer. About a third say they want more wellbeing support from their company. Interesting, people have been also, as I indicated at the beginning, reporting positive as well as worrying impacts on both their physical and mental health.
Can you tell us what those impacts are?
Yeah, well, let's break it up then, mental and physical, Sam. So the mental health, a number of people have found this a really positive experience. 11% of respondents thought their mental health has actually got better. And primarily they put that down to additional free time and exercise, the opportunity to take exercise, because we know how important exercise is in terms of maintaining good mental health. However, 50% did say their mental health had got worse, and they indicated that that was primarily caused by missing their usual routine, which we know has been a significant issue for people, not just on furlough, but for people working from home. You know, work is lovely because it gives us a nice structure to our day. You take that away, and sometimes that creates issues for us in terms of we feel a little bit lost in terms of what to do. On the physical health side of things, Sam, Tiffany, so 23% of respondents thought their physical health had got better, and 3/4 putting that down to the ability to exercise more, because we do know one of the biggest issues for people in terms of preventing them from taking regular exercise is a perception that they don't have time to do it. So that's certainly helped. However, over 1/3 thought their physical health had got worse due to less exercise, ironically, or missing their usual routine, eating less healthily, and as I'm sure not declared in the research, but I'm sure we're all aware of, perhaps we're all having too many glasses of wine in an evening these days. Yeah. So
I'm not agreeing to anything.
no, and that's why nobody agreed to it in the report. Nobody agrees to the alcohol consumption, even with their doctor. Yeah, we always underplay it. So there will be a
thumbs up there, Richard.
yeah, okay. Yeah. So overall, you know, 30%, as I said at the beginning, 30% of employees are actually have developed expectations that they want support from their employers. So 30% want more mental health support, and 23% are looking for more help when it comes to their physical health. So well-being has really come onto people's agenda, and I'm sure we can all sort of agree to that from a personal point of view. But we're also finding from the work I'm doing with these types of employer forums, Sam, chambers across the country, as well as other associations, actually employers are more and more now recognising that well-being could or should, depending on their viewpoint, play quite a strategic role in how they run their businesses and how they are able to develop happier, more motivated, more productive workers. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you tell us where the divides were? What were the biggest divides within this report?
There were quite a few, but the biggest one undoubtedly was between those that are furloughed and those still working. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. I've certainly seen it in my part of the Westfield business. Not necessarily a negative high-level tension, but there is just that underlying sort of them and us feeling about who's doing what. So from the report, we found 35% of those working from home think their furloughed colleagues have less to worry about or are getting an easy ride. Yeah. But on the flip side, a huge 64% of furloughed workers were really worried about their personal finances and job security. And that was leading to real sort of mental health impacts. And that was particularly the case, by the way, for furloughed parents. So it's really easy for one group of people to sort of think the other group have got it better. But there's real need, and I think this comes back to the leadership piece that we've all got to take account of, is making sure people appreciate that everybody's got problems and issues. It's just they're different because we've got different circumstances, yeah? So though that was the biggest, it was also quite shocking to see how many divides there were in general, and the rifts that COVID's created. Even those still working had interesting divisions that we as employees need to address. Yeah.
Okay, so what were the divides between the people still working?
Oh, it's interesting actually. When we look at those going into work and those working from home, it's two distinct categories of people still working. Over 1/3 of each group wanted to do the opposite. So those having to go into the workplace wanted to stay at home, and those staying at home wanted to go into the workplace. So as employers, you know, we never ever win. Yeah. And this is like parents, we never win. And that's the same case. But other divides that were starting to crop up is, believe it or not, people feeling jealous of colleagues' home working environments. And because everything's being done on Zoom and this type of thing, I mean, I found it wonderful because we seem to be getting, with my teams, we're almost got closer together because we get to know, we feel that we know people better because we see them in the homes. But obviously, what we have to again appreciate as leaders and employers is everybody that is working from home or working from home, they have different circumstances in the home place, whether that's the kids, whether that's the suitability of their workstation, those types of things. So again, we've got to be really aware of that. So that was what was driving, I think, some of those sort of jealousy feelings. Believing parents are using their kids as an excuse to do less, believe it or not. So 4 out of 10 people that we're still working, we're saying, well, those with kids aren't doing as much as me because they're blaming it on the kids. So those sort of things happening. And basically half of colleagues were thinking that the other half were doing less work than they say they were doing. Yeah. So again, not particularly healthy. And these are issues everybody on this call may have actually seen in their own place, or might actually just need to be aware that these things might be going on, and it's our job as leaders to deal with and address those in sort of, but obviously in a subtle fashion. Yeah.
I liked your comment saying that you feel like you're within your team, you've all got closer because you're seeing inside people's lives.
Yeah.
I definitely relate to that. I think there's a lot of people that I've been on calls with, clients who are very aware that I have 2 children because they often interrupt and, you know, they walk hard through the office door. So it's, I like that comment. Yeah. So can you tell us about those that are on furlough?
Okay, so you can look at this in 2 ways. And this is what the report showed, is that you can look at the attitudes towards those on furlough, and we can also look at how furloughed employees feel. So if we take the first one, so those colleagues of ours that are still working, you know, 1/3 of those were thinking that their colleagues on furlough have less to worry about. And again, it's not appreciating what happening in other people's lives. And again, sort of almost 30% said for possibly driven by parents, may I say, because 21% of those with kids feel they should have been furloughed instead of a colleague who was furloughed but without kids. And again, that's representative of all the childcare issues people have generally had with schools, nurseries, play schemes being closed because of the situation. But more specifically in terms of how furloughed employees feel, you know, 1/4 wish they hadn't been furloughed. And we've got to appreciate that a lot of people have gone onto furlough, regardless of how wonderful we might think it could be as an opportunity. I mean, when in life do you get the chance to have a 3 to 6 month paid sabbatical? And that's the way I've tried to approach it with my team members that are on furlough. Say, look, don't worry about it. Just take the opportunity, use it. But it's easy for us to say that because over half of those furloughed workers feel their mental health has got worse, 56% actually. But actually for those furloughed parents, it's even higher, 66%. And a lot of that is driven by concerns about personal finances, especially if their employer isn't topping up the government contribution. And it's also driven by concerns about the future, because we tend to find that people that have been put on furlough see themselves or worry about themselves being first on the list of redundancies if redundancies come around, which is only natural. So we've got to take care of that. So as I say, those issues about finance are really driven by whether employers are topping up pay or not, the concern about redundancy, but also, you know, 9 out of 10 furloughed workers, the big issue for them is just not having a definitive date of when they were coming back. which was really, really causing them sort of anxiety and stress. So top two things furloughed workers want are focused on uncertainty. So 40% of them say employers should be doing more to reassure them about the security of their position. But we as employers know that's really, really difficult to do in those times. Their other big concern actually was about catching the virus if and when they return back to work. So again, there's going to, in terms of the whole return to work process, there's a lot of work we're going to have to do as employers in terms of creating the safety of bringing people back.
Can you think what most about things?
I'd say parents, actually. The impact on parents. It shouldn't surprise us either, but the report really did bring out that actually the parents working from home particularly appear to be experiencing the biggest impact. Furlough, the others were. And of that group of parents, a third reported their physical health has deteriorated, and almost half say they're struggling with the mental health. And that's undoubtedly to do with sort of just the time issues of having to work, having to do all the childcare. You know, they've got hugely difficult lives that we need to be cognizant of, I think, and look at how we support people. But what was really concerning, and sorry, I shouldn't say this with a smile on my face, by the way, was parents seem to have a really lack of empathy for other parents. So overall, of all the respondents in the survey, 46% thought parents use their kids as an excuse to do less work. That actually increased to 53% between parents themselves. Why? I have no idea, but there we go. So it just shows that even between people in similar situations, tensions and divides have started to form. So again, from a leadership perspective, it's very easy for us to categorize our employees. Oh, they're furloughed, they're key workers, they're working from home, they're working in the workplace. But actually, there's also divides amongst those groups. So I think we need to, what's the phrase? It's very easy to sort of think about how we're going to handle people based by pigeonhole them into categories. But we just have to recognise we may need to take a much more individual approach to employees, because even within the categories we set, there's massive variations in terms of how people have dealt. Yeah. Sorry, that got a bit doom and gloom there, didn't it? But yeah, it's what people are saying.
Yeah, it's very intriguing, isn't it, as to what people are saying and how this report's been pulled together. Do you have any tips for how we can adopt to how we work with young children at home?
Yeah, well, I think the report showed that this is a huge issue for people, and you know, as employers, we can't just ignore it and pretend people just have to do what you do. We're going to have to accommodate it and account for it. And that's going to be particularly tricky, I think, is if we start to transition our people back to work sooner rather than later, but there aren't childcare facilities open. That's going to be a real challenge. Okay, so you know, I know we are approaching the traditional 6 weeks holiday, so shouldn't be any different from last year, should it now? But actually, the facilities we had, the clubs that we had that we could put kids in while we went to work during the holidays, they're potentially not going to be open or available. So it is something we're going to have to seriously look at in terms of tactically who we bring back when, you know. So I think from that, the first piece of advice would be about our leadership, and that we do as leaders have to recognise these key pressures are out there. And I think that's one of the, from my perspective as the Director of Wellbeing, one of the biggest benefits of this report is just highlighting what those potential issues might be for employers. We're going to have to look at how people can work differently. We've already started to do that. I think that's going to become more the norm than anything else. And we're also going to give people what I'd call psychological permission to do things differently. Yeah. And that's again where we need to work with individual teams and individuals within those teams a lot more closely. So our team leaders are going to be really, really important in taking that message through about how we do things differently. And those team leaders, by the same token, are going to have to be given very clear guidance about, from senior management, about what's expected of how we do things differently. Yeah, what's in scope now, what's not in scope. We had a great example, by the way, linked back to directed childcare. Just to give you an example, it was about a month ago on one of these forums, somebody said, oh, well, can I give you an example of what I'm doing? And we said, yeah, we brought them on. 28-year-old, she was, her partner 30. They had a 5 and 6-year-old kids. They were both working from home, but for different employers. So you can imagine the chaos there, right? Who's going to do what? How are we going to cover this off? And they just said, look, it's just mayhem. So they got together between the two of them and said, well, what if we did 2 hours on, 2 hours off, and we rotated? So one of us could look after the kids while the other was working. But to do that, to get all our hours in, we'd have to do 6 days. So we could propose 6 days to our employers and then have Sunday as a family. So they both went to their employers, who were both quite enlightened, immediately asked what the other employer was saying. Both employers then said, right, look, this sounds really sensible. We'll agree to this. Yeah. But both employers were quite enlightened. So they did actually say, but look, we recognize the issues. We do not expect you to work 6 days to make up the hours, because we know you'll be really focused in the 2 hours you're on anyway. Yeah, so that, but they also then made sure that the teams that those two belonged to understood what the situation was at home and what their rotated hours on and off were, so that you didn't get any conflicts and things. And it worked really well. So that's a really good example of an organisation looking at how things could be done differently, but also an organisation where the culture is that individuals felt they could actually take responsibility and propose things themselves back to their team managers. Yeah, which is really important, about how they could do things differently to be more productive. And they both came out of it saying super productive now, because there's no concern. When they're working, they know the partner's looking after everything, and they're really focused and really a lot out of the 2 hours. So the last thing I'd say on the topic, Sam, is communication, absolutely key. So critical if we're doing things differently, that everybody within the team understands how individuals are doing things differently, so we keep everything working through together. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Richard. So we've spoke about the divides. So can you tell us how can employers start to bridge these divides that have been shown in the report?
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot already in terms of, from these forums that I'm doing, about what organisations are doing to create those bridges. This is before the report came out, because I think most of us knew most of these divides and tensions that were happening. It's great for a report to bring it all together with evidence that actually what I thought was happening in my organisation, that's been replicated elsewhere. So I think the first thing is just recognising, acknowledging that these divides exist, whatever divide it is within your organisation, and then putting in place the right measures to support the teams in terms of, dare I say, their happiness and well-being, because a lot of these divides are creating sort of unhappiness and edginess. So it's about how we sort of bring that sort of comfort back. It's easy to think about people's finances or the logistics of coming back to work. But I think what's going to be equally important is we're thinking about team cohesion, especially if we're going to recover the performance, happiness, productivity of our workforce. It's going to be, the finances, logistics of getting back into work are the easy tick boxes. I think the serious issue is going to be, having those teams cohesively working together again. So once we've acknowledged those issues, it's then about talking to our teams about how they're feeling, what support they're looking for from us as an employer. And I'm using that everybody on this in this group. That might be help with the physical well-being, for people to support with that, or it might be about additional mental health support. We know almost a third of people want their employers to support that. So that's in addition to the practical support of this is how we're going to get you back to work and this is how we're going to support you financially. I take view to how we're managing this whole process. So acknowledging and actively working to bridge those divides alongside supporting people's well-being would, I think, be the best way of enabling people to work together as one team again. Yeah, recognizing that we won't be doing that in the same context as we were doing 3 months ago, because the old normal ain't coming back. Yeah, the new normal is going to be, we're going to be working differently in some shape or form. Yeah.
Brilliant. Can you tell us where employers are falling short?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because there'll be people on the call saying we're not falling short. And what's interesting actually is we as it's amazing when I've done these forums, what's been really, really striking is how much employers have actually done for their people. Yeah, it's really, really heart-lifting to see actually how people do care for their people and look after them. I think what this report suggested, though, is even though we're doing that, and we understand, we know we're doing that, employees don't always perceive that to be the case. Yeah, and we know it's perceptions, not reality, that drive behaviours. So employees will complain about things because they perceive X, Y, and Z isn't happening, even though X, Y, and Z might happen. So again, there's going to be significant communication effort on our part. Almost not. I don't think we should. What's the phrase? I don't think we should rest on our laurels that just because we're doing something, our employees recognise we're doing it. I think we have to do a bit of a skills job here in terms of actually actively letting them know. That is, well, 4 out of 5 respondents from the survey felt their company had handled the crisis okay, which is great. Yeah, that's really good. There were a significant number who felt they needed more from their employer. So 30%, for example, felt they needed more in relation to job security from their employer. All right. 35% wanted more reassurance generally about their future and what was going on. And for furloughed workers, that seemed to focus on receiving a definitive return to work date. So we've got to look at how we do it. And one of those things that is really difficult is what people want, we can't give them. We can't give them definitive return dates. We can't tell them when the things are going to happen. But actually, those employers that are just upfront and honest about that, people really appreciate it. And what those employers are doing is saying, look, I don't know, but this is what I can tell you. You can definitely expect for the next week, next 2 weeks. And what they're doing is they're breaking down employees' thought process to smaller, manageable chunks. Because all the anxieties and worries develop when you're thinking about what's going to happen in the long term, which you've got no control over, no information about, no idea. So if we can focus people on the here and now in the short term, that helps us to help them manage their anxieties. Yeah, and from what we said before, remember, a third of people want more support on mental health. A quarter want more support in physical health. So again, the question we can all ask ourselves is, what are we doing in terms of the well-being support, mental or physical, that we're providing our people? whether they're at home, whether they're on furlough, whether they're in the workplace, what we are proactively doing to support people, because quite often those types of support are the sort of areas of support that then give people reassurance about the future. Because why would my company be offering me all this support in terms of my mental health, my physical health, if they're going to get rid of me in 4 weeks' time? That just doesn't make sense. You know, it's that sort of logic that people have in the thought process. So quite often you can use well-being not just as to engage your people, but also to subtly reassure them about the future, even if you don't know what the future is. But it can help. Can help, yeah.
So based on these challenges, how best can business leaders or HR professionals support their employees, their people?
Right, okay, that's an interesting one. And I think add into that as well, business owners, because there are a large number of chamber members, there may be people on this call where you actually own your own business. And so you have to be both the business leader, the HR leader, everything else. So I think the first thing I'd just let everybody to keep a clear thought about is human nature. We are wired, humans are wired to actually want things consistent and predictable in our lives. Yeah. So when I've been talking to HR professionals specifically in these types of forums, what they've been saying above all that their people want is just a clear communication about what happens next and what they can expect moving forward. And it goes back to what I just mentioned before. Quite often the answer is, we just don't know. But people appreciate that honesty, but then they appreciate then being given the guidance to sort of go, well, look, but this is what you can expect for the next couple of weeks. Yeah. And then in a couple of weeks' time, we'll then talk again about what you can expect for the next 2 weeks. So people start building their comfort to doing that. And we need to appreciate, as I'm sure everybody does on this call, that then that type of communication and support will need to be different for different groups of workers, and also might need to be different for different individuals within each group of workers, again, that we touched upon earlier. Yeah, so I think that's the key challenges for us as leaders. Yeah.
Okay, so if you had to narrow it down, what would be your top tips right now to support employers?
That's a horrible question. Right, I'll give you, I've got a couple that things, and we've covered most of them already in various bits of things, but if we're going to be really, really concise, I'd say communication. As clear, as unambiguous as you possibly can, even if it's just a very clear, I don't know, we don't know. Yeah. Leadership, really, really important all the time, especially so when we're trying to manage events like this. We have to be firm in our leadership quite often. Yeah. But that's no reason with situations like this that firm leadership can't also be compassionate. And that feeds back into the themes of dealing with people, of individuals, recognizing they've got circumstances can't do for us. Yeah. So communication, leadership, combined with support that we've talked about before, whether that's practical support in terms of advice on working from home, how to survive furlough, those types of things. And we've got lots of support documents like that, Sam, on the Westfield Health website.
Yeah. As
well as well-being support, both mental and physical. Yeah, because if we ever needed well-being support, now's the time, isn't it? Yeah, it really is. The final thing top tip I'd say is actually for everybody on this call, it's you yourself. What are you doing to actually look after yourself? Because if you're not in the best possible shape, mentally and physically, then what value are you to the people that you're leading? So I would say the most valuable resource for your people is you. Yeah. And if you don't care for yourself first, what chance have you got of giving the appropriate care to a team of others? Yeah.
Great advice.
That would be the top takeaway, actually.
Okay. So how will COVID change the way we work?
Well, it'd be interesting to find out later from everybody on the call how it's actually, how it's changed, but how will it change work, how we work? But what's interesting, going back to the report, Sam, was that less than a third of those working from home actually want to go back to the workplace. Yeah. And half said they'll miss the way they've been working over the past few months. So for an awesome experience, yeah. I mean, I've found it a really positive experience. I'm working a lot more effectively, a lot more productively from home. I don't have my hour and 40 commute into work in the morning and the afternoon. So not only am I getting more work done, my actual work-life balance is a lot better. So ask me to go back into the office in Sheffield 5 days a week, and I'll go, no thanks, not if I can avoid it. So we're going to have to be careful here, because these dynamics are going in place. I mean, having said that, there's an awful lot of people wanting to come back to work or to the workplace. And that's because, what work is really, really, we know this from all the research, it's a really, really positive element of people's general well-being. Even though I'm a lot more productive, a lot happier working from home and having a better life balance, I do miss life that brings in terms of on a day-to-day basis. So I think employers are going to, and certainly what the report is suggesting, is they're going to be expecting a lot more flexibility from their organisations in the future. They're going to be expecting a lot more support. Nearly half of them believe they'll work from home more often in the future. So there is a common theme in an awful lot of organisations, for those people in those roles that can work from home, of course, is that they won't necessarily stay working from home, but the likelihood is neither will they be in the office full time. We'll have a much more sort of flexible type arrangement of when people are in, when people are at home, but also when they're working during the day. So I've seen a lot of organisations where they're allowing individuals, because of, for example, their childcare, to actually work in the evenings, but then have their evening in the afternoon, so they can sort of look after the kids. A lot of organisations now are starting to, because there used to be a big thing before COVID, and we did a lot of coaching support work for organisations that were actually strategically closing their offices and moving employees back to home working. And this is before COVID or anything like that. And the big issue was about the lack of trust. How do I know they're actually doing it? They're working. And I think this situation has forced us into that and actually recognised, hang on, we can be adults about this. People will do their work. But actually, what we're starting to find now is organisations are looking at it in terms of, I can't physically see whether that person's at their desk X amount of time. But you know what? All I'm interested in is outcomes. Are they delivering their objectives? And if they are, why do I need to worry about whether they're at their desk at every set portion of time? So there is a mindset moving now towards performance of people. It's about outcomes rather than inputs. So rather than worrying about how many hours somebody's working a day, people are now focused on, are they delivering the outputs that I wanted them to deliver today? And if they can do that more efficiently in less time, then what's the problem? Okay. So I think there's this recognition, Sam, that COVID's fundamentally changed work. We need to take time to talk and listen to staff, to understand what their views are, how they feel about things, because, those that do and those that are more flexible are probably going to recover quicker than those that try and enforce going back to the way we were. Yeah, undoubtedly, I think that's the case. And what we've also got to realise is actually this more flexible way of working has huge benefits for people. you know, and particularly in terms of work-life balance, those types of things. So we might actually be forced into a position that we can capitalize on and actually deal with a number of issues that were making employees unhappy before. So it could be a real win-win situation for both employees and employers. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. So what are the people who are working from home actually saying?
Hi,
Right.
guys.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to try and do it now while it says my signal isn't that bad. We've had quite a few questions in the group chat, but I got kicked out halfway through. So the ones that were put in before, I can't actually see now.
Okay. Yeah, them
so I'm just concerned about time. Sam, would you mind going into the chat and reading out any of the questions?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
I just want to make sure they get answered before, if anyone has to actually leave at 1, I just want to make sure the questions get answered.
Yeah, and while Sam's just doing a quick scan there, everyone, we were literally just about to finish with that last question, which was about what people who are working from home saying, and we've actually covered off most of it already. And a lot of that was generated about people working from home at the moment, anxious about returning to work because of, you know, how am I going to get to work and travel? So there's a lot, that's the predominant feature. So there's a lot we're going to need to do in terms of what we put in place or how we reassure our people in terms of it's safe for them to come back to work, not just because we've got the workplace safe, but there are safe forms of transport into work. Yeah. So what have you got, Sam?
So I just like this saying from Joanne, the saying that we are all in the same boat, but same storm even, but in very different boats is very relevant here. Some in cruise liners, some in leaky rowing boats. I like that.
Just like
to say that one. That was a really good one. So, so Charlotte has said, do you have any figures on how many employers have topped up salaries for furlough workers?
I don't know, but there will be. There will be somewhere. Now, I don't have that figure. I know quite a few have. I know at Westfield, we've continued to pay everybody at their full 100% salaries. Now, obviously, every organisation will be different in terms of their capability to do that, quite frankly. I think most would like to if they could, but I don't know what the exact proportion is. Sorry about that.
Okay. Lizzie has said, such valuable statistics. Thank you. Are we able to have a copy of these results? Yeah, I can get the divided together report sent to you.
Yeah. The report, I think, Liv went out with all the invites as well. So if you do double check your invite, you might see that it's sitting there as an attachment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sent the report as an individual email to everybody that was booked on yesterday afternoon between 2:30 and 3. But if you haven't got it, if any of you haven't got it, just drop me an email and I'll forward it on to you again. But I did send it, yesterday afternoon.
Okay. Lizzie's also put very interesting this to survey them when they're back in work, them and us syndrome, potential impact on well-being when back at work for those who have been furloughed, potential for resentment from both those furloughed and those who may have needed to work longer hours in their absence.
Yeah, and it's can I just comment on this, because I know that was a comment rather than a question. It is something that we need to be aware of, and we need to look at how we very carefully manage that. It's natural tendency for those still working to feel a little aggrieved, particularly when you look at government legislation annual leave, that we can now roll forward holiday, that type of thing, where people that are working have been actually taking holiday together. There'll be all sorts of dynamics going on like that. So rather than look at things negative, we've started at Westfield, started to look at that more positively. So what we've done is we're doing this with the August bank holiday. We did it with the April one or May one, where for those that were still working home or in the workplace, we gave them an additional day's free holiday so they could extend the long weekend into a super long weekend, just as by way of a thank you. And I know from a departmental perspective, in the part of the business I run, what we're looking at very carefully is almost taking it a step further. And those people that are working is actually saying, well, look, if you've had to take some holiday, you know what, we're not going to count X number of those days, just by way of thank you. And I think it's little gestures like that, which are sort of a thank you to those still working. One, are valuable in their own right, but also just take the heat out of them and us situation. Now, it might not be giving things away like that. It might be just consciously thanking them on occasion, so they feel that the work they're doing has been really valued, and that might just be enough to head off those little conflicts. Yeah, but it is a big one.
Charlotte says, we have set very high expectations on the training to be done for our furloughed workers. Any tips on motivating training to be taken seriously and get the most productivity out of the furloughed team?
Right, well, I must say, my experience so far, and I may just be a lucky manager. My experience so far is actually I had to furlough half my team. We just started bringing them back over the last 2 to 3 weeks. You know what? They wanted to come back. They'd had enough of time off. So for me, there wasn't an issue of motivating them to come back. What we have found is we've had to invest quite a bit of time in almost re-inducting them back into the workplace and their role and their job and functions. Because they've had, imagine what your email box is like after a fortnight's holiday. These people have had 3 months off, you know, and we've got to recognise that it's going to take time for them to get back into the routine, to be able to manage their energy levels, and actually just to refamiliarise with what their job was and how they do it. So part of what we've done in terms of returning furloughed workers, and I think it's kept them motivated as well, is stage that process. So they come back initially part-time, and then they perform a part of their role, get that under their belt, then add the next bit in, and slowly, and not necessarily slowly on our part, but then increase the time that they come back. And the government scheme for flexibility in terms of part-time working allows this now. So we can then gradually build up their hours as we phase them back in. And that's had quite a motivational effect on them in terms of just saying, instead of just saying, and I know this won't always be possible, it depends on the role. Instead of just saying, right, next Monday, you're back in full time and you're expected from a standing start, just bang, you're back into full pelt. And that's when people will start to feel overwhelmed, anxious, demotivated. So I think it's more about the way we bring people back than anything else. That might be anyway. It'd be interesting to hear what others have got to say on that.
Thank you, Richard. And Joanne has said the British Sleep Society has found that 70% of the population have reported a change in their sleep since the lockdown. They anticipate a 35% increase in insomnia in the coming months. Employees may want to take this into consideration regarding productivity, errors, and reduced creativity. Relationships may also be strained when staff are tired. Sleep deprivation also has a negative impact on mental health. HR managers can ask about sleep and offer support in this area.
Yeah, and I think sleep it's been probably well publicised. It has been a big issue for people in these times. Poor sleep is driven by, poor sleep isn't an issue in itself. It's always triggered by something else. Yeah, there's always a cause to poor sleep. So whether that is you're on furlough and it's anxiety about things that's causing poor sleep. Poor sleep is often caused by people not falling out of a regular routine, because again, we like predictability and consistency, and the brain does as well. So it likes to switch off at the set time and then wake up at a set time each day. So there's an awful lot that's going on. So absolutely right, sleep is going to be a big issue. Before this situation, something called TAT, which stands for TATT, stands for tired all the time. Huge issue for productivity. And whenever I mention tired all the time, most people sort of go, yeah, that's me. They recognise it very easy. Probably one of the, if you like, huge latent issues out there in the workplace that is actually disrupting productivity, because people are just tired all the time. And sleep is a big factor, not the only factor, but a big factor in that. So that will be something we need to be aware of, definitely. Right.
Anything else, Richard? Are you happy to pass back over to Liv?
No, I'm happy if everybody else is happy. But I'm more than happy to take any sort of questions as well, Liv, if we want to do it sort of by microphone rather than...
Yeah, if anyone has got any questions now, we've got a couple of minutes left. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask any questions, then feel free. I think a couple of people have just said thanks, and a couple of people have got to go because they've got other calls.
Yeah, we've hit the time.
Yeah.
Great.
Anything from anyone else? Okay, I'm going to go with a no then.